How'd you come up with this concept? Was it some sort of real life event that inspired it?
No. I was never buried alive, thank God. Nor did I ever know anyone that was. It was. It came down to making an extremely affordable movie. That's it. I mean, again, I wish there was some really cool, artistic, or almost even more of a, I don't know, a better story to tell. But it's not. It was that I wanted to make a film that I could afford to make for about $5,000. So it started with the money. And so naturally, when you have a film that only costs $5,000, you can't have all these elaborate sets and props and everything else, or many locations. So I just kept paring down my setting and everything until I was left with a guy in a box. And from there, I needed a story to support that. And I didn't necessarily want to make the horror thriller version, a la maybe Saw. And the thing is, I'm a huge fan of that genre too, actually. So it was tough to not do that. So I wanted to make something a little more socially relevant, and so that's what ultimately landed me on the contractors, the civilian contractors working in Iraq, and how frequently they were being taken hostage, so on and so forth. And it's a very real, and it's a very scary situation because it's so real. And so that's what ultimately happened.
So you got your guy in a box in Iraq.
Yeah.
Did you do any kind of research? Did you actually hear about these types of things happening to people?
Well, no one's ever been buried alive, thank God. I hope it doesn't happen. I going forward.
After this movie, that might be my new worst nightmare.
Yeah. I mean, I did think about that for a moment. To again, I'm not creating ideas for people, but the thing is, then I finally said, there's so many movies where really horrific things take place, and you can't dwell on that sort of thing. But anyway. I have my guy, he's there in Iraq, and what's going on in real life is that these truck drivers are just doing their job, even say carpenters or whatever, food service workers, just civilians. They're out there trying to make a living for their family back here in the States. And they get out there and they realize that it's tough, especially since the film takes place in 2006. It's not very, it's not a happy place. And in addition to that, one of the few functioning businesses out there is the situation with kidnapping and the ransom. And it's not necessarily a political statement that's being made by the people taking kidnappees, I guess. They're not. It's most times criminals. It's just everyday people trying to do whatever they can to make money out there. So it's actually this weird sort of parallel, but more on the nefarious side, people that are pushed to the extreme. You have someone like Paul Conroy, who's from a very working class existence in Hastings, Michigan, and he is willing to go to Iraq. He knows it's not going to be a walk in the park, and he's willing to put his life on the line for his family. He's willing to do that for his family. And kind of the dark mirror image of that is these criminals in Iraq who have been pushed to maybe an extreme level. And that's not me saying in any way that I understand their plight. And I'm trying to say that they're actually good people. I don't know if they are or not. They could be real bastards. And this guy, Jabir, could be a real bastard. But the fact is, of what's really going on is that people are taking people to make money. And thankfully they're not burying them alive, but they're keeping them in really awful situations.
So now you've got all this and you sit down to write it. What's your process then? Like, do you have like a special place you sit, or I don't know, note cards you use?
With a film like Buried, writing this, it was a little different because it's such a linear story. In that, because you're not cutting to anyone or anywhere else, it really is like once the story's off and running, it just doesn't end until that straight line is done. And that's usually a bad way to plot a script, because you usually want those peaks and valleys and you want all these other things going on. But I think in this case, I just kind of just banged the script out in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, because it really became an exercise in, what would someone do? What would I do if I woke up in this horrible situation? Who would I call? If I have a phone, someone left me a phone, and I had access to the outside world, who would I call? All right, I'll try, my family, okay, if they're on pick up, I'd call the FBI, I'd call anyone, I'd call the Salvation Army. I'd go down the line from the Army all the way down to, whoever out of the Salvation Army, anyone that could help find me. And that's what I would do. And in the context of Paul Conroy, being who he is in particular, as a someone that went out there for a purpose, he has actual like a protocol to follow. He's given the safety number. So he was prepped. Everyone that goes out there for this sort of thing is kind of prepped to say, if something bad happens, here's the number you contact, whatever, these people can help you. So he doesn't have access to that number at first because they took it. So it really became that fast-paced linear journey of what would I do.
What would you do? Would you be okay?
No, absolutely not. No, I mean, I don't have a very specific fear of being. I'm not claustrophobic, so that's not. People sometimes ask that of me, but no, I don't. I mean, but just like any other person alive, if I was put in a coffin alive, I wouldn't want to be there, and I'd be absolutely terrified. So, it just what you see Paul Conroy doing is more or less what I would be doing.
So did you consider any other movies, like, I guess this isn't really a genre, but like of this type, like something like Open Water, where people are stranded in the ocean, or I mean, this was probably after you started working on this, but Frozen 2, where they're trapped on a ski lift. Did you ever consider other films?
Yeah, well, it's weird because in the process of writing this script, coming up with the concept, as I said, I was trying to make a film. I had a money idea first, and which sucks, but it was the truth at the time. And so I tried to come up with different ideas, and I thought of one-room thrillers, like maybe a hotel room, maybe an elevator. And I'm glad I didn't do an elevator because now Devil's out, and it's a great film. So I went, okay, not an elevator, not this, and then I landed on the idea of the guy buried alive, and I actually did write a totally different script based on that concept, and it was a horror thriller. It was more like Saw, because again, I'm such a fan of that genre, but I just, for some reason, it wasn't working. It didn't seem fresh enough, because I think what happens is people generally equate the concept of someone being buried alive with the horror genre instantly. So it seemed like, for some reason, it didn't seem as original and as fresh. It almost seemed expected. And I wanted to come up with something that seemed entirely unique. A film's never been shot before with only one person in such a confined environment. There have been other movies that have had scenes, like obviously Uma Thurman in Kill Bill, and there are scenes, but there's never been, even say TV shows have done it, there's never been this. And I just wanted to have something that made it unique on all levels. So that's why I decided to write more of the Hitchcockian thriller with that heavy dose of true drama.
So what were some of the other, like, more horrific elements you played with? Like, I'm picturing him using that knife a little more than he did.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. That was one of the things I toyed with, to say, like, should that scene go? Because I felt, did that toe the line too much into the again, kind of the horror thriller genre? And then I realized, no, it didn't, because if he were taken hostage and he were with his captors, if the money wasn't coming in, they would have to keep raising the stakes to get that money, and that usually would involve showing that person getting beat, getting cut, bleeding, being hurt on camera. But because he is the only one in this environment, he has to do it to himself. So it's not it's not to torture. They don't tell him to cut off his finger because they're torturing him. They're doing it because it's raising the ante. We need this money now. Show blood, they'll give the money.
So then, now you've got all of these things inside the box. Did you ever consider doing things outside of it? Because I'd imagine that when you're confined in that space, a lot of filmmakers want to throw in, I don't know, a dream sequence or a flashback. Did you ever try to include that?
No, I didn't. Not from the script end. I really wanted it to be an entire film that took place. And I knew it could work because, as I said, I wrote another script with the guy buried alive. And that was the horror thriller version that I wrote. And I got to the end, and it worked. I wasn't thrilled with the script that I wrote, but I knew it could work. It's like I got to I got to the end. I got to fade out the end, and it didn't leave the box. So now when I kind of did my page one rewrite and came up with what is the current incarnation of Buried, I knew it was possible to write it. And that's the way I wanted to do it, again, because it's almost as if it's expected to cut away. And that then would take it would no longer be completely unique and original. And on top of that, I always knew that if the film were to be made and released theatrically, which thank God it did, I always knew it would be such a visceral experience for an audience to be sitting in a dark movie theater watching this if it didn't cut away. Because the moment it cut away, they would be reminded of the fact that they were watching a movie. Whereas sitting in a dark movie where it never cuts away, they feel like they're in a box with Paul Conroy.